So I had this idea that I wanted to discuss, and that was about the loaded lingo in FGC. You notice a lot of words and phrases and language that people use to talk about fighting games, matchups, situations, techniques, characters, etc., etc. And they're very often loaded and have some words with many layers of meaning behind them. And I think a lot of people outside of the FGC space who aren't like really in depth with it can't read between the lines to see what they're saying, or they get blinded by this language and they don't really know what it's all about. I thought it would be fun to take to Twitter, ask about their favorite examples of loaded FGC lingo or language, and I wanted to get some people to talk about it. So I asked, what are some examples of loaded FGC lingo/language, and I gave some examples: cheap, honest, fair, and fundamentals, and I was wondering what other people found interesting in this vein of things. What does it mean that something's cheap? This was a question that I saw like talked about on my YouTube channel a lot, like in the comments. What does it mean to be cheap? I think what gets lost is if two high-level players who kind of know how things go, they play the game at a competitive level, at a professional level even, and they call something cheap, it's a bit different of a dynamic than when someone observing from the outside might call something cheap. There's a difference in the meaning and the intent based on who is saying it and from what perspective. People who are in the know and they accept the game for what it is and are focused more on mastering the game, cheap is almost a compliment, right? Cheap can be a compliment amongst players who are in the know in that sense. Oh, that is cheap. Meaning, oh, you were able to apply a technique or use a situation that covers many options, or it's very hard to tell what you're going for, therefore it's going to be very effective. It's usually something that's effective. So if you do something cheap, that's something you want to strive for. That gets lost when you kind of pull further and further away from the core competitive audience, because people start calling characters cheap all the time. And when they call them cheap, they're not doing it in a way where they're like, oh, this character's cheap, you should use them. They say, this character is cheap. If you win with them, it's not a real win. You didn't earn your win. It starts becoming different. If the person saying it is able to bear the responsibility, the burden of being required to get the win at all costs, and they know any loss is their fault, cheap is a compliment. To the person who does not want to burden that weight, who wants to make excuses for the losses, they'll move cheap over as an insult, and they can use it to dissuade people from picking up certain characters or doing certain tactics, right? So I think people hear like me call something cheap. For instance, I see people in my YouTube comments like, oh, why are you calling X so cheap while you play Balrog and G? You can admit things are cheap, but that's a good thing. Like if someone hits me with something cheap and I call it cheap, it means, yeah, you should be doing that. That was smart of you to do. It's not me shifting responsibility from me not being able to handle it. It's like at the end of the day, no matter what, if you're going to win, you have to deal with it. Honest is one of my favorites though. Honest is one of my favorites, and that's the one I mock the most because I have no idea what this means. Do you guys know what this means? Honest, I think, is supposed to be the opposite of cheap. That's the intention, right? But I don't know what it actually means. Honest means you weren't tricked. I guess, but people use that to refer to characters, I think, that spend a lot of time in grounded neutral, but I don't know if that's always honest, because some characters, their strengths are just playing the ground game. They have better buttons in neutral. They want to play that game on the ground. Their strength is not having mix-ups or catching you by surprise. Yeah, if you talk about Karen, for instance, yeah, Karen's an honest character because she plays on the ground and it hit confirms a low forward to 500 million damage over and over, but that's just what she's good at. She's extremely good at it. And other characters don't have that. Other characters don't have a confirmable low forward that prevents you from walking away. So the things that people call honest is it's always kind of a blurry line. And it definitely has that connotation of, oh, like if you win with an honest character, you deserved your win. If you win with a cheap character, you didn't deserve your win. There's an extra layer of implication behind it. That goes along with fair. Fair and honest, I think, are the ones that go hand in hand. And that's why I always make fun of them. I do EX slow, rush with G, activate V trigger, do command grab. Fair and honest. Fundamentals. I think this lost all meaning to me when Street Fighter V came out and everyone was saying that the only people who would win in Street Fighter V were the OGs because it's all about fundamentals. And then that fell apart real fast. Fundamentally sound character, fundamentally based character, fundamental playstyle. There's some standard meaning to that, like if you anti-air, if you play a ground game, if you know how to poke, know how to punish. That's usually what people refer to as fundamentals. And if you have a fundamental playstyle, it's probably what you do. You don't try to force guesses on offense. Those are fundamentals. So there is some like common understanding of that, but it's one of those things that people use to kind of twist perspectives. So those are my examples. I want to see what other people said. So I threw this tweet out before the stream. So let's see. Skill. That's a funny one to me. I've been trying to adopt the mantra of there is no skill, there's only winning. To me, at the end of the day, you just got to win. Skill is something that people do they create like a made up stat point just to say I have more skill. It's usually a way to comfort yourself when you lose. It's not something I think you should focus too much on. Blended. Of course, the Zangief Flair will say blended. I like that one though. Once you get into the Zangief blender, you're not getting out. Come on, you got to admit it. Free is loaded. Yeah. I mean, by nature, free to me, I'm okay with that one. When someone calls someone free, because it's so ridiculous, it's so grandiose. You know, people are like exaggerating when they say it. So it's not coded language. It's very obviously a loaded statement. So that's why I'm okay with free, because people do it in such ridiculous contexts. It's mostly used by like the Twitch chat and people in the audience when they're in the peanut gallery purposely being morons. I don't know. It's okay. Sometimes you want to sit back and be a degenerate in the Twitch chat and talk shit. And there's a time and place for that. Free is definitely loaded language, but we're all in on the game. Spamming comes to mind. Yes. I don't think many of us talk about spamming because I think as you get better at the game, you realize everything has a counter. You might say spamming in a few contexts as in abusing a move over and over because there's very little counters to it. But this is a super common one for, you know, the average YouTube viewer who doesn't play that much. They call everything spamming. It's not that they're calling things spamming, it's that they're wrong when they apply it, right? If you're fighting another low-level player and they're spamming because they don't know what else to do, then that's spamming. I agree. But you should beat them. You should beat them if they're spamming a move, because that means they're not thinking about their options, and you can counter that option if you know the answer. But the problem is that people apply this to high-level gameplay where they're obviously not spamming, and there's a lot of thought into the process of what they're doing and in the process of what they're choosing not to do, right? I mean, every fucking Daigo match you see, there's someone who says, why do people like this guy spamming? So it's not that it's never true, it's that it's used in a lot of situations where it's not true at all, and when it's often used is when people are salty, and if someone's spamming, you should just beat them. Broken, my man Joey. Yeah, this one is pretty bad. I think that people have totally lost sight of what the term broken means. Broken should be reserved for situations where characters actually break the game, like game-breaking glitches, or that they're so overpowered that they make the entire cast irrelevant. And I don't mean hard for the opponent to beat, I mean you cannot play. Here, let's take a quick look at this. Quick detour. Let's read this description. Upper God tier, the title given to the characters who are totally unbeatable and require no thought to play. Okay, I know a lot of people in the YouTube comments might be like, yeah, you know, Seth, Yuri, and Akuma. No. Yeah, G and Balrog. No. Unbeatable and require no thought to play. He has a move that beats every move besides Thunder Megazord's Dragon Punch. So only one move in the game can get past this. So already he's unbeatable. Leads to a knockdown, which you can get a combo from. So he's a fireball, it beats all of the projectiles, auto aims itself, hits multiple times. So a projectile that goes through every other projectile in the game, leads to combos, hits everywhere. You guys getting the picture? I don't know if you've also noticed that he's flying everywhere. Let's go to the most broken move ever. It's the invulnerable strike that leads to combos. Invincible can be done out of hits. Are you reading that correctly? Can be done out of hits. No startup. Are you looking? If you hit him, he just does the move. Can't be hit low. Can't be thrown. Alright, you guys are getting the picture here, right? Ivan Ooze legitimately breaks the game. He does not play by the rules of the game at all. He completely makes the entire cast irrelevant, okay? That's what broken was originally reserved for. These days, broken means almost whatever you want it to be. Any top tier that annoys you, broken. Any technique or situation, broken. It's lost its meaning. 50-50. It seems that in a lot of situations where the term 50-50 would be applied, the situation has more than two options to it. Having a 50-50 setup feels to catch all with multiple options. I agree, and I'm guilty of this myself. A lot of situations we call 50-50 aren't. I think Dragon Ball is a game with a lot of actual 50-50s. But even then, it's not exactly the same because you can still guard cancel and hope for the best. Street Fighter 5, it's like, okay, Geef does SPD on you. Yes, it's kind of 50-50 in terms of do you choose to get hit by the meaty or do you choose to get hit by the command grab? But he has different options based on what you do. If you do up back, if he does standing heavy kick as his meaty, you won't get crush countered, right? It'll just air reset you. If you did backdash and you did heavy kick, he would be able to get another air SPD, put you in the same situation again, right? If he does regular grab on his end to mitigate his risk, if you jumped away, then he can follow you up with an air SPD. But if you did backdash and he did regular grab, you might get out of the situation, right? So there's kind of a 50-50, but there's ways for both players to mitigate their risk reward on both defense and offense so that it's not a true 50-50. I kind of agree and disagree. I'm still going to use the loaded term 50-50 and say Geef is a walking 50-50 machine because I don't like him. Scrubby, usually used when a player can't deal with a risky scrubby playstyle to make it seem as if they are a better player because they are not a scrub. I do like calling people scrubby from time to time, though. To me, a scrub is someone who refuses to accept blame for losses or something of that sort. It's not your current skill level, it's refusing to admit that you can improve. That, to me, is what's scrubby. The ideal thing to do is to call people who play with a very risky playstyle, to call them, you know, risky playstyle, gambling playstyle. I want to use one of those loaded terms, random, right? You can call it that. Everything has its time and place, though. Real Street Fighter? Yeah. I don't know what this means. Definitely goes hand in hand with honest when people try to justify playing a certain way or try to point out how a character shouldn't be played. Calling someone fraudulent will forever be hilarious to me. Yeah, this one's kind of funny too. I think calling someone a fraud is definitely not as relevant as it used to be. I think in general in the FGC and in video games as a whole, with more prevalence on Twitch and social media and tours and everything, there's no more big fishes and small ponds. We're all in the ocean now. I think in the past, there would be people who were building some success and building a reputation, getting a name for themselves in different regions, and then you had to have the regions come together every once in a while and duke it out and see who was the best, but that couldn't happen all the time. That was like before online play was more standardized and readily available, and before Twitch and how you can see people play. So you could be a fraud because people's expectations wouldn't match up with the reality of how you perform. Like maybe this guy got lucky with one win and then it became this whole legend, and then it turns out he wasn't that good. But now you kind of know where people stand. For Street Fighter, it's pretty easy, man. You just go to CapcomProTour.com. Everything else in between is whatever. I don't think this is as prevalent anymore. We're all in the ocean now, swimming with the sharks. Pro player, this is definitely a loaded term because I don't know why people say that. It doesn't exist. People would call me a pro player from time to time, which was flattering, I guess, but it's not my job. I remember when I was first getting into the scene, I would definitely call people pro players a lot more. If I saw them on streams frequently and they did okay, I would say pro player. But that line is so fucking blurry, dude. Like, there's so many people who are just practicing getting good and they win. A pro player can fall off so easily in this day and age. I don't know if it's the games themselves or just the era, but like the level is not so much where you cement yourself at that level forever without work. And there's plenty of players who have wins over pro players and they're not pros. I'd rather it be referred to people who it's their actual profession. Neutral skipping is a big one to me. Neutral skipping, because it also involves neutral, which is everybody's favorite word to throw out if they're trying to justify how they play or to criticize how someone else plays or how another character plays. I always fail to understand how a move is neutral skipping when it's a move you use in neutral. I get what people are referring to, like Urian EX knee, ball rate EX dash punch. I get that, but at the end of the day, that is the neutral. You have to consider those options. So this is like layers on layers of loaded language. Very common thing for people to use to discredit someone's playstyle. If someone has a move that gets them in, they have a move that gets them in. That's just how it is. Mashing scrubby random play, unfair or broken OP attacks or strategies. Yeah, random is a big one. Random, I think, means unpredictable usually. I think that's what people mean when they say random, but people often use that as like a negative connotation. But if you could be truly random, first of all, it's never truly random, right? If it was truly random, I don't think you would win more than 50% of the time. Probably less, because it's actually fucking random what you're doing. They're being unpredictable. And the goal of that is to throw off your opponent, and that's how you win fighting games. You can be unpredictable to win fighting games, or you can just control situations entirely, right? But even when you control situations, you still have to be unpredictable in your control, or else they'll counter your control. This is how it is. Yeah, Soldier Boy said it, it's dismissive. Calling someone random is basically dismissing the decisions they made as not being part of any kind of thought process or logical decision making, when really it could have been calculated. Sometimes people play a really bad risk-reward game and you have to adjust to it and realize that, oh, maybe I shouldn't be approaching them because I can't predict what they're doing, but they'll do something risky and get themselves killed trying to come in. That's one way to deal with random play. Like, don't approach. Let them give you an opening without you having to do much. So it is very dismissive. There's some very strong players that are random. Kazunoko, the guy who won the last Street Fighter 4 Capcom Cup in 2015. You guys saw how many times he woke up DP. You call him the most random dude to ever play a fighting game. And he's kind of good at games. He's kind of good at fighting games. So random is definitely loaded. It's dismissive. Oh, here's an interesting one. Online playstyle. I use this one. I use this a lot to the point where I don't know what it means anymore. Yeah, I think it's also pretty dismissive. It kind of goes along with random. I think online playstyle is usually a catch-all term people use to describe someone who is abusing tactics that aren't as effective in an offline environment where you can react more easily. I mean, fighting games are really designed around the human reaction limit, and when you have factors that mess those things up, like any kind of lag, input delay, rollback occurring, stuttering, that messes up with your visual reactions, it makes certain things better than they should be, right? Dashing is supposed to be as effective as it is, and then if you have more lag and less frames to react, dashing becomes more effective. So people who you play against them, the connection is bad, and they use a style that goes for all these tactics, which are usually easier to react to offline when there's no lag, but they're effective with it online, and you can tell they start basing the whole playstyle around that. Becomes an online playstyle. That's how I use it. But and when you're salty, it could be used to be dismissive as well. It's a little loaded, but it's effective, I think, in describing what you want to. Hi YouTube, indeed. Hi YouTube. I think we're gonna call it quits here. You guys want to say hi to YouTube and ask them to please subscribe if they're already watching, making it this long in the video, because looks like 60% of the people watching my videos don't subscribe to the channel. You already made it this far, might as well subscribe. Why not? That's all the content I have. Subscribe to find out what I farm from Twitter for content next time.